What you're about to see next is one of the modules, bonus modules from HyprAccelerator, where I discuss a bunch of mental models and how exactly to apply them to Rising. Now, they're not as fancy as, a different script that allows you to change your waybar config on the fly or, a theme switcher or anything like that, but trust me, these mental models are pretty much as useful, if not more useful, than those scripts and, all those configs themselves. Because if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Enjoy. Applying mental models. Right. So, first off, what even is a mental model? You can think of a mental model as a pair of tinted glasses through which you see the world. Okay, here are a couple of them. These are the ones that I'm going to be explaining and teaching you about. So, under general thinking models, we have inversion, map is not the territory, first principles thinking, and Bayesian thinking. Then in problem solving models, we have 5 whys, heuristic thinking, trial and error, and the Feynman technique. Now, in my opinion, the problem solving models are one of the most crucial and most beneficial models to understand because problem solving is essentially pretty much the only thing that we're doing when we're icing our systems. Things break, we need to figure out how to solve those things that broke. Problem solving. And it's also solving whatever other issues we might have. Basically, it's problem solving, right? Then we have systems thinking, which include compounding, leverage, bottlenecks, and feedback loops. This system thinking section, right? So this section, these models, you can use them to improve your already working system. So you'd use problem solving models in order to get a working system, right? To get a base system. And then you'd use system thinking models in order to improve your system to get it to be the best version that it can be, to get your setup to look as good as it can. Now, this might seem like a lot, but actually they're really simple, like really, really simple. We can finish this in not too much time at all. Okay, so first one we have is inversion. Invert, always invert, said Albert Einstein, right? And this time it actually was Albert Einstein who said this quote. I would have found a picture of him, but none of them were pictures that I saw that he was looking good enough in, so it's fine. So instead of finding solutions to problems, we find the problems and then just avoid them, right? A common question most people have is, how do I focus? In today's distracted age where we have Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts and TikTok and God knows whatever other platforms, short form content platforms these days, many people have lost their attention spans. So, how do I focus is most people's question. Simple, just don't be distracted. Okay, but how do I not be distracted? You turn off notifications, you turn on do not disturb, you keep your phone in another room, and so on and so forth. Therefore, we have just achieved focus through avoiding distraction. Right? It's as simple as that. So if you're trying to go from A to B, instead of asking the question, how do I go from A to B? You ask the question, how do I not go to B? Or what is the way that I can guarantee that I never ever get to B? And then we just avoid all that doesn't get us to B and we get to B. That's how inversion works. Let's say that I wanted to take a flight to Hong Kong. Okay, then using inversion, I would just think of all the routes that didn't take me to Hong Kong, and I would just avoid those which would take me to Hong Kong. You see what I'm going with this? That is how you do something through inversion. Now we'll apply to rising. Okay, so how do I make my setup look good? First, you identify what makes a setup look bad, then you avoid it, right? Pretty simple. So this setup, for example, the wallpaper is nice. Okay, Tokyo night theme, not bad. The dock, the dock could use a little bit of more improvement. The workspaces, okay, that too. What's up with the orange widgets? They're really out of place. The clock looks like it's from 1982. All the widgets look like they're from 1970. Yeah, probably computers weren't even around back then. And what is all this? It's basically really cluttered. And what is this image of this person doing over here? Basically, this is not the kind of setup that I would like, that I would prefer, right? Now this this looks so much cleaner and so much more pleasing to the eye, right? We have Rofi in the center over here. We have EU widgets. Pretty sure this system is using EU for the bars and the dock and everything. So yeah, looks pretty nice. It's using material hue colors as well, which just adds to the niceness, right? Now, how I would use inversion is I would find exactly what about the setup I don't like, which I just explained, and then basically avoid that to get a setup that looks something like this. That's it. Pretty simple. Inversion is pretty simple. All you need to do is just avoid what doesn't work and you will get to what does work. It's much better than trying to break your head out to figure out how to actually do something when you can just not do that thing. That's not going to get you there. Okay? Then we have map is not the territory. A representation of reality is just that, a representation and not actual reality. Okay? Imagine you have a map of a zoo. The map shows where the lions are, where the tigers are, and where the snack bar is. Okay? It doesn't, however, show the smell of the animals, their sounds, the people walking around, and so on. So the thing is, a representation of something is obviously not going to be the thing itself. Like, you can take another example, right? We can apply this in terms of outdated documentation for a program. The map, which is the documentation, in that case, is definitely not the territory, which is the app itself, which includes all the changes the developer would have made to the app without documenting. Okay, so it's like going to a completely new place with an outdated map. That doesn't work because the map is meant for an older version of something and where you are is the newer version. Those two don't correspond, and because of which you were lost. Right? So it's a helpful reminder not to confuse the picture or the documentation, which is the representation of the actual thing, which is reality. So where I'm actually going with this is, let's say, for example, let's take a real life example here, okay? We'll take another example, which is in real life. Let's say that we have a map. Okay, we have a map of a certain place, like let's say New York. Okay, we want to go to New York and we have a map of New York. But somehow, by some miracle, we end up in a place like Omaha or Nebraska. Trying to use the map of New York in Omaha or Nebraska is not going to work because we're using the wrong map. Okay, a representation of reality is not the actual reality. In this case, there is a mismatch between representation and reality, because of which we cannot make accurate decisions and do stuff properly. So it's very important to get your representation and your reality correct. Okay, so let me just show you this on a board. Here we have the circle. Here we have one circle, okay? And here we have another circle. Let's say that this circle, the circle on the left over here, is the objective reality of the world. So I'll just write this down, okay? So objective reality of world, or we'll just call this the objective, okay? Let's just increase the size, like so. Now this is the objective reality, this circle over here. Then we have the circle on the right, which is our subjective. So we'll put this down here. Subjective. Let's just change the size to something like this. Okay. This is our subjective reality. Now, the less that our subjective reality corresponds to or with objective reality, the more suffering and the more pain and the more incorrect decisions we make in life. Okay. So we can take the same example of the map that I gave earlier, or the documentation example. Subjective reality, in that case, would be incorrect documentation, okay? Objective reality would be the actual territory, which is the program itself. Our subjective is so far away from our objective that we are not able to do anything right? Because outdated documentation for a program is not good. You're not going to be able to do anything because, hell, the developer might have just overhauled every single thing and nothing works. Okay, now let's say that we had proper documentation where everything was up to date and documented correctly. Well, then our subjective would overlap with our objective quite a lot. So we have this section over here that is overlapping a lot, okay? This means that we have less suffering and we have less problems to deal with because our subjective perception of reality is quite similar to or quite in correspondence with the objective reality. Basically, this is what we're trying to do in life all the time, right? We want to get our subjective experience of reality as close to the objective truth and nature of the world as we can so that we can do things right. The farther away that our subjective is, the more wrong we are going to be. That's it. Okay, great. Then, first principles thinking. Now, it's breaking an idea down to its most basic parts and reasoning up from there. Okay? This is Elon Musk. Surely you would have heard of him, or at least seen him. Now, Musk, being the legend that he is, was thinking about batteries. Why electric cars were so expensive to build. So the problem was, everyone said batteries were too expensive for electric cars to be affordable. Most car companies said batteries cost $600 per kilowatt hour, and that's just the market price. They said, right? And they accepted it as a given. They were reasoning by analogy, okay? So we can reason using two frameworks, as I like to call them. We can either reason using analogy or we can reason using first principles. First principles, as I showed over here. So basically, this is first principles thinking, right? Breaking an idea down to its most basic parts and reasoning up from there is first principles thinking. But a first principle is actually a statement of truth with which cannot be further questioned. Okay? So if we reason up from first principles, if we reason from fundamental truths that nobody can question, then chances are, you remember this objective and subjective circles, Venn diagrams we have over here, chances are, if we reason from first principles, this subjective is going to heavily overlap with our objective because we're dealing with fundamental truths. If, however, we reason using analogy, If, however, we reason using analogy, which is basically reasoning using whatever others are saying to be true, right? We can call that to be reasoning from analogy. If we do that, chances are our subjective is going to be so far away from the objective that we're not doing anything right. And we're missing out on a lot of innovation that we could have had if we chose to reason from first principles, okay? Great. So, with that being said, let's discuss about what batteries are actually made of. So what are batteries actually made of? Nickel, cobalt, aluminum, lithium, carbon, some polymers, and a steel casing, right? If we can figure out how to build batteries more efficiently, we can make electric cars affordable. This is what Elon Musk thought. Okay, he looked up the prices of the raw materials on the commodities market, and what do you know? Cost was much lower, around $80 per kilowatt hour, right? And this allowed him to make electric cars really affordable. So high battery cost wasn't a law of nature. It was a design and manufacturing problem. So Musk thought, if we can figure out how to build batteries more efficiently, basically whatever is over here, we can make electric cars affordable, right? And this happened. He made electric cars affordable by Tesla designing its own battery packs and gigafactories to scale production. Great. Now, let's apply this to ricing. Let's say that your waybar config has individual islands instead of a sticky bar and you want shadows on it. This one was actually a problem that I had to deal with because I couldn't get shadows working properly. Let me tell you about it. You'd look online for a solution, try it, and see that the shadow looks weird. It's covering transparent sections of the bar too. I'd show you over here right now, but it's sort of weird looking and I'd have to break it on purpose, but you get the idea. Basically, this entire bar section, instead of just having the shadows around the islands rather, it's everywhere. The shadow is everywhere and it looks ugly. Not good. Nothing that you try works. Now what do? You first understand what you're dealing with, right? Which is the GTK CSS, box shadow, and text shadow properties. These two are the properties that we use in order to get shadows onto whatever part of our bar that we want, okay? Then look for the syntax and start applying it only to the modules left, module center, and modules right classes, okay? Then this ends up being the correct approach and you get your desired result. So instead of reasoning from analogy, as I explained earlier, which is past experiences and groupthink, you reasoned from first principles and solved your problem. Great job. Then we have Bayesian thinking. This one's a fun one. It's a way of reasoning and making decisions based on updating your beliefs as you get new evidence. This is pretty much something that we use in our day-to-day lives as well. Let's say, for example, that, let's see here, what example can we give on updating our beliefs? Yeah, it's as simple as acting, okay, assessing, and adjusting. So let's take a video game example. Okay, let's say that you were playing a game, let's say Call of Duty. If you've played Call of Duty before, there is a metric, okay? There's a metric in the game known as your kill-death ratio. Ratio of whatever, right? Basically your kill-death ratio. In multiplayer games, you can either play in such a way that you get your kill-death ratio higher or lower, right? I haven't played too much Call of Duty and dived into the metrics as much, but yeah. So you update your beliefs as you get new evidence. Let's say that your KDR was going up and you wanted it to go down for whatever reason. Again, I have no idea how this specific metric works, but if you wanted to reduce it, you update your beliefs based on the evidence that you get after every game. So let's say after a particular game, your kill death ratio is probably something like 3, okay, 3.2 or something, and you wanted to get it to 4. What you have to do is just play in such a way that you get that. And the way you play in such a way is by updating your beliefs as to how you need to play. Okay? I wonder if that makes sense or not, but basically it's this. Okay? So it comes from Bayes' theorem, which is a fundamental theorem in probability theory. So you start with an initial belief called a prior, and then you update that belief when new data or evidence becomes available. This is called the likelihood, okay? Resulting in a revised belief called the posterior. You don't have to worry about the names at all, okay? Just know that you have initial belief, you have evidence, and you have revised belief. That's how it works. Okay, so imagine you're a doctor trying to see whether a patient has a rare disease. This disease affects 1 in 1,000 people. This is your prior, okay? The first initial belief that you have is that the disease affects 1 in 1,000 people. Patient takes a test that's 99% accurate, right? There's still a 1% chance that things are going to get messed up and you're not going to get a correct answer or a correct result. This test that you're taking that the patient is taking is your evidence. Okay, so we have the initial belief and we have the evidence so far. Even if the patient tests positive, you don't immediately say that they have the disease, especially given how rare it is. It might be a false positive. Now this is your posterior, which is your updated belief. So we have the 3 parts. We've combined them, and now we have successfully used Bayesian thinking. We thus conclude, okay, the posterior or our updated belief is going to be our conclusion. So even if the patient tests positive, you don't immediately say that they have the disease, especially given how rare it is, it might be a false positive. So you conclude that the disease might be a false positive given how rare it is. This is your updated belief based on the evidence that you got. Let's take a waybar example again, okay? You are creating a new config when suddenly your bar dies. Your initial belief, which is your prior, is that a change you made in the config caused it to die. You run waybar in the terminal and look for warnings. You don't find any. This is your evidence. You then remember that you had a malfunctioning update script that was updating something, okay, that you had to fix weeks ago but didn't, which ended up randomly killing waybar. This is your posterior. Probably it was something like a hook or whatever it might be, some script that killed waybar. That's your posterior and thus your conclusion. If you like what you just saw and you want more, and you also want proven strategies and frameworks on how you can make theme switchers that don't absolutely drive you insane, while also looking extremely, extremely beautiful, then just click the first link in the description. Check out HyprAccelerator because I've assimilated all the knowledge that I have about Rising Hyperland over 3 years, and I've put it into there just for you. The amount of time that you're going to save not having to look for everything yourself, not having to break your setup on your own like a million times, trying to figure everything out is insane. Like, trust me, it's going to be the best investment that you'll have ever made. Like, when I say that, I mean it. So just click the first link in the description right now, and I'll see you there. Peace.